Two hands slammed a young woman face down into the dirt. Her knees cracked against the hard ground. Somebody pinned her wrists. A third man knelt on her back and pulled her long braid tight in his fist. She screamed. Then came the sound nobody expected. Scissors. Cold metal sawing through the hair she'd grown her whole life. They laughed. One of them held up a phone, filming every second like it was a joke for the whole town. When they finished, they tossed the braid in the mud and walked off. Her name was Delilah Cross, 22 years old, a farm girl who owned nothing but a dying dairy and a scarred old dog. What none of those men knew was who she'd married last spring. And by nightfall, the whole town would learn. What did that quiet mechanic do when he found out? Stay with me on this one. Let me back up and tell you about Delilah, because you need to understand what kind of woman she was before any of this happened. She was up every morning at 4. Not sometimes. Every morning. The cows didn't care if it was a holiday, didn't care if it was raining, didn't care if she'd slept 2 hours or none. So she rolled out of bed in the dark, pulled on her father's old coat, and walked out to the barn while the rest of Millbrook was still dreaming. The dairy had been her father's. He'd worked it 40 years, and then one winter his heart just quit on him, right there in the milking parlor, and Delilah found him in the morning. Her mother had left long before that. So at 19, Delilah took over a farm that was already sinking. 22 cows. A mortgage the bank kept threatening to call. A tractor held together with baling wire and prayer. She never complained. That was the thing about her. She just worked. She'd figured out young that complaining didn't milk a cow or pay a bill, so she stopped doing it and started doing the work instead. 16-hour days, cracked hands, a bank statement she was scared to open. And still she kept the lights on month after month by herself. And she had Deacon. A blue heeler, gray around the muzzle now, with a scar across his shoulder from a coyote he'd fought off years back. That dog followed her everywhere. Out to the fields, up to the loft, down the long gravel drive to the mailbox. Where Delilah went, Deacon went. He was the one thing in that whole valley that had never let her down. Now Millbrook was a small town, and small towns have long memories and short kindness. Delilah was poor and everybody knew it, and there was a certain kind of person who couldn't let her forget it. That person had a name. Cole Tanner. Cole was the son of Wade Tanner, who owned the biggest cattle operation in the county. Cole had money, a lifted truck, and a pack of ranch hands who laughed at everything he said because their paychecks depended on it. There was Bo, big and slow. There was Jesse, mean and quick, and there were 2 or 3 others who came and went. They spent their afternoons at the feed store, chewing tobacco and looking for somebody to knock down. Delilah was easy. That's how they saw it. A girl with no father, no husband around, no money, no backup. They'd flick cigarette butts at her boots when she came to buy grain. They'd call her the milkmaid in that voice that made it sound dirty. They'd move their trucks to block her from loading her feed, then stand there grinning while she waited. It had been going on for years. It started small, the way these things do. A comment, a laugh, a shove that got passed off as an accident. And every time she let it go, it got a little bigger, because that's what men like Cole learn. They learn what they can get away with. And nobody had ever once told him no. One time the winter before, they'd let the air out of 2 of her tires in the feed store lot, and she'd had to walk 3 miles home in the cold and come back the next day with a pump. And when she got there, Cole was leaning on the fence like he'd been waiting just to watch her face. He never touched the tires himself. He never had to. He just smiled. She took it. She always took it, because she believed if she just kept her head down, it would pass. Here's what those men didn't know, though. Last spring, Delilah had gotten married. It happened quiet. No church, no party. She'd met a man named Rourke Vance when her truck broke down on the highway outside town. He'd stopped, fixed it in 20 minutes with parts from his own bag, and wouldn't take a dime. He was a mechanic, big but quiet. He had gray in his beard and tattoos up both arms that he kept covered with long sleeves. He talked slow and listened more than he talked. They married at the county courthouse on a Tuesday. Deacon was the only witness who mattered. And then Rourke was gone a lot. He worked a shop 3 counties over, came home when he could, and never explained much about where he went the rest of the time. Delilah didn't push. She trusted him. He was gentle with her in a way nobody had been in years. The first night he stayed at the farm, he got up at 4 with her without being asked and carried feed buckets in the dark, and he never made it a thing. He just did it. That told her more about him than any speech ever could. Nobody in Millbrook thought much about him. A drifter mechanic who married the poor dairy girl. That was all he was as far as the town could tell. They had no idea what that quiet man really was, and they were about to find out the hard way. The day it happened was the hottest day of the summer. Delilah drove into town for feed, same as always. The heat sat on everything. Cole and his crew were parked outside the feed store, 4 of them, tossing a knife into a fence post to pass the time. She almost turned around. Something in her gut told her to, but she needed the grain and she'd already made the drive, and she was tired of being afraid all the time. That's a thing people don't understand about fear. You can only carry it so long before you get sick of the weight of it and decide you'd rather just get your feed and go home. That decision, small as it was the one that put her in that lot that afternoon. She loaded her bags. She kept her eyes down. She almost made it. Then Cole stepped in front of her. "Well, look at this hair," he said, and he reached out and grabbed her long braid. She'd never cut it, not once in her whole life. It hung past her waist, thick and dark, the one beautiful thing she owned. "Let go," she said. He didn't let go. He wrapped it around his hand. "You know what this looks like to me? Looks like a rope. Looks like something a man could tie a horse with." The others laughed, and then it went past teasing. It went somewhere it had never gone before. Cole yanked her backward. Bo grabbed her arms. Jesse pulled something out of the truck, and Delilah saw it was a pair of livestock shears, the kind for trimming a horse's mane. She fought. She really fought. She got a hand loose and raked it across Cole's face, and for 1 second she thought she might break away. But there were 4 of them and one of her, and they dragged her behind the store, out of sight of the road, and they put her down in the dirt. Somebody knelt on her back. Somebody pinned her wrists. And Cole took that braid in his fist and started to cut. The shears were dull. It wasn't quick. He sawed at it while she screamed, and each pull ripped at her scalp, and the others held up their phones and laughed and narrated it like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. "Say bye to the milkmaid hair." "Somebody call the barber, we got a customer." When it was done, her head was raw and patched and bleeding in 2 places. Cole held up the braid like a trophy, then dropped it in the mud and ground it under his boot. "There," he said, "now you look as poor as you are." They got in their trucks and drove off, and one of them posted the video before they even reached the highway. Delilah stayed on the ground a long time. Then she got up. She didn't cry, not yet. She picked up what was left of her braid, the dirty rope of it, and she held it against her chest and walked to her truck and drove home. By the time she got there, the video was everywhere. Every phone in Millbrook, the diner, the church group, the high school kids. People she'd known her whole life were watching her held down in the dirt, and half of them were laughing and the other half were just watching. Nobody called her. Nobody drove out to check on her. Not one person. And that, if you want to know the truth, was worse than the shears. The shears took her hair. The silence afterward told her exactly how much this town thought she was worth. Nothing. She was worth nothing to them, and now she had proof. She parked at the barn. Deacon came running, and the second he saw her, that old dog stopped cold. He knew. Dogs always know. He pressed himself against her legs and looked up at her and let out this low whine. Delilah climbed the ladder to the hayloft. She'd gone up there to cry since she was a little girl. and she sat down in the hay with her ruined head and finally let it out. She cried like something inside her had broken loose. Deacon climbed up after her, laid his head in her lap and stayed. She didn't call her husband, she didn't call anyone. She figured, what would be the point? Rourke was 3 counties away, and even if he came, what could one quiet mechanic do against the whole town of Tanner? Nothing. She'd just be dragging him into her shame, so she made a decision. She'd handle it alone. She'd wear a scarf, she'd hold her head up, she'd get through it the way she got through everything. After a while, the crying stopped. She wiped her face on her sleeve. She climbed down and did what she always did. She fed the cows. She fed Deacon. She stood at the kitchen sink and drank a glass of water and looked out at the fields going gold in the evening light. The truck engines had faded. The town had gotten bored and moved on to the next thing. The valley was quiet again. Just the crickets starting up and Deacon's tail thumping against the floor. It's over, she told herself. The worst of it is over. Tomorrow's just another day. Milk the cows, keep your head down, survive. She almost believed it. Then she heard it, far off at first. A low rumble coming up from the south road out where the highway met Main Street. It didn't sound like a truck. It didn't sound like one of anything. It sounded like a storm rolling in on the ground. Delilah set down her glass and walked out onto the porch. Deacon went stiff beside her, ears up, a growl building in his chest. The rumble got louder and louder, until the windows in the old farmhouse started to buzz in their frames. Headlights. Not 2, not 4. A whole river of them pouring down the county road toward Millbrook, one behind another behind another. She counted and lost count and started again. 40. There were 40 motorcycles coming down that road, and riding at the front of them she saw a man she knew. A big man, gray in his beard and a leather cut with a patch across the back. Her husband, Rourke Vance, the quiet mechanic who fixed her truck and never took a dime. Except tonight he wasn't quiet and he wasn't just a mechanic. Tonight he was riding at the head of 40 men, and every one of them wore the same patch on their backs. The Iron Saints. Somebody had sent Rourke that video after all. Now here's the thing you have to understand. Delilah had married a man she thought she knew. A gentle man. A man who spoke slow and covered his tattoos. She had no idea, none, that when he disappeared for days at a time, he was riding with one of the most feared clubs in 3 states. That the men at that shop weren't just mechanics. That the patch he'd earned had cost him 20 years and more blood than he ever told her about. He'd kept it from her to protect her, to give her a normal life. A wife who milked cows and had nothing to do with any of that world. But you shave his wife's head and film it for the whole county to laugh at, and that world comes to your door. The bikes rolled up the drive and stopped, all 40 of them, and the engines cut one by one until there was nothing but ticking metal and crickets. Rourke got off his bike. He walked toward the porch. Behind him stood 40 men in leather, silent, waiting. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at his wife, at her raw and patched-up head, and Delilah watched something move across his face that she'd never seen there before. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just reached up and took off his sunglasses and asked her one simple question. "Who did this to you?" And that question, the quiet way he asked it, that was the moment this whole story turned. If you're still with me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what happened next in Millbrook is the part nobody in that town ever forgot. Delilah didn't answer right away. She stood on the porch with her hand pressed to her scarf, and she looked out at those 40 men, and part of her wanted to lie, to say it was nobody. To say she'd done it herself or an accident, anything to keep her gentle husband from the darkness she saw building in his eyes. But Rourke asked again, softer this time. "Delilah, look at me. Who did this?" And she thought about the laughing, the phones, the braid ground into the mud, the whole town watching and nobody, not one soul, coming to check if she was alive. "Cole Tanner," she said, and his men behind the feed store. Rourke nodded slow. He climbed the steps. He put his big hand on the side of her head, gentle as anything, and he pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," he said. "I'm gonna fix this. Not with blood, I promise you that. But I'm gonna fix it so it never happens again. To you or anybody." Then he turned around and looked at his brothers, and he said one word: "Ride." Now understand something. Rourke Vance had spent 20 years learning that the loudest kind of power isn't the kind that swings first. He wasn't going to give the Tanners what they'd give him. He'd seen where that road went. He'd buried men on that road. He'd stood over a young brother's grave once, a kid barely 20, who died over exactly this kind of thing. A debt paid back with a fist and then another fist and then a knife, until nobody could even remember who'd started it. He wasn't going to do that to his wife. He wasn't going to make her a widow over her own hair. So the Iron Saints didn't ride to hurt anybody. They rode to be seen. 40 bikes rolled down Main Street at a crawl, slow, deliberate. Engines low and steady, that sound you feel in your teeth. Every porch light in Millbrook came on. Every curtain moved. People came out to see, and what they saw was 40 patched bikers moving through their town like a verdict, and Delilah Cross riding on the back of the lead bike, her scarf gone, her shaved and wounded head held high in the streetlights for everyone to look at. That was Rourke's idea. "You've got nothing to hide," he'd told her. "They did the shameful thing, not you, so we're gonna let this whole town see exactly what they laughed at." She'd been terrified. She'd stood there with the scarf in her hands and shook, because taking it off meant letting every one of them look at her, the same people who'd laughed. But then she thought, they've already looked. They looked all afternoon and did nothing. So let them look now and let them see me sitting up straight. And she'd taken off the scarf. And now she rode down the center of Millbrook with her chin up, and the same people who'd laughed at that video went dead silent as she passed. They stopped in front of the Tanner Ranch. The gate was iron, 10 feet tall, with the Tanner brand welded across the top. Behind it sat a house the size of a hotel, all lit up. Wade Tanner had built an empire on this land, and everybody in the county knew you didn't cross him. Rourke didn't touch the gate. He just parked in front of it and shut off his engine, and 40 men shut off theirs behind him, and then he waited. It didn't take long. Lights came on. The front door opened. Wade Tanner walked out onto his big porch with a shotgun cradled in his arms and 3 ranch hands behind him. And there in the middle of them, half hiding, was Cole. "You're on private property," Wade called out. "You've got about 10 seconds before I call the sheriff." "Go ahead," Rourke said. "Call him, I'll wait." Something in the way he said it made Wade pause. Rourke got off his bike. He walked up to the gate alone and stood there in the light. "My name's Rourke Vance. That's my wife." He nodded back toward Delilah, standing beside the lead bike with her bare, shaved head. "Your son and his friends held her down in the dirt this afternoon and cut her hair off with sheep shears. Filmed it. Put it out for the whole county to enjoy." Wade's face didn't move. Boys will be boys, it's hair, it grows back. And that right there was the moment the crowd that had gathered on Main Street stopped being on the Tanners' side, because people had followed. Half of Millbrook had trailed those bikes down to the ranch, and they were standing back there in the dark listening. And when Wade Tanner said it's hair, it grows back about a girl they'd all watched get held down and mutilated, something turned in them too. Shame is a funny thing. Sometimes it takes seeing your own cruelty on somebody else's face. Those folks had laughed that afternoon in the safety of their kitchens. Now they were standing in the dark hearing a rich man wave it off like it was nothing, and they heard, underneath his words, the same voice that had let it happen for years. Their voice. And they didn't like the sound of it. Rourke didn't raise his voice. "I'm not here to hurt your boy. I want you to hear that clear because I know what you're expecting and it's not what's gonna happen. I'm not gonna lay a hand on him. I'm a lot of things, Wade, but I'm not gonna become the thing your son already is. He reached into his cut and pulled out a phone. What I've got is the video, not the funny cut your boys posted. The whole thing, every angle. 4 grown men holding down a 110-pound girl and cutting her while she screams. And I've got their faces and their voices. Bo saying, "Hold her legs," Jesse laughing, and your son Cole saying, and I quote, "Now you look as poor as you are." The crowd murmured. Wade's jaw tightened. "Here's what's gonna happen," Rourke said. "First thing tomorrow, that video goes to the county sheriff, the state police, and the district attorney. Assault, unlawful restraint. And in this state, filming it and distributing it, that's its own charge. Your boy is looking at real time, not a slap, real time. You've got no proof. I've got 4 confessions on video, Wade, in their own voices. I don't need anything else." Rourke put the phone away. "But I came here first before the law to give you a choice, because I've learned a man deserves a choice, even a man who didn't give my wife one." The whole street had gone silent. Even the crickets seemed to hush. "Send Cole out here," Rourke said, "and the other 3 right now in front of everybody, and they're gonna say what they did out loud, and they're gonna say it to her face. And then tomorrow they're gonna walk into that sheriff's station on their own 2 feet and turn themselves in and take what's coming. They do that, I'll ask the DA to go easy. First offense, guilty plea. Maybe they see the outside of a cell before they're old men." He let it hang. "Or," Rourke said, "you point that shotgun at me, and you find out real fast how many friends I brought, and how many more are one phone call away, and how the rest of your life goes when the Iron Saints decide a man's family is a problem that needs solving. Your choice, Wade. But you make it now." Wade Tanner stood on his porch a long time. He was a hard man. He'd built everything he had by never backing down. Never once in his life had a man stood on his land and told him how it was going to go. His whole body wanted to raise that gun. You could see it in his shoulders. But he looked at those 40 bikes, and he looked at his own neighbors standing in the dark, all of them watching him, none of them on his side anymore. And he looked at his son, hiding behind him, 24 years old and shaking. And something in Wade Tanner broke. He set the shotgun down against the porch rail. He turned to his son. "Get out there," he said. "Do what the man says." "Dad." "You did this," Wade said, and for the first time his voice cracked. "You did this and I raised you, so it's on me too. Now get out there and be a man about the one thing in your life you've ever had to answer for." Cole came off that porch like a whipped dog. His friends came after him, dragged out one by one, until all 4 of them stood in the light in front of 40 bikers and half a town. Rourke stepped aside. He walked back and took Delilah's hand and brought her forward up to the gate, and he stood beside her, but he didn't speak for her. "Say it," he told Cole. "Look at her and say what you did." Cole couldn't meet her eyes at first. Jesse was crying. Bo was staring at his boots. "Look at her," Rourke said again. Not loud, just certain. And Cole Tanner lifted his head and looked at Delilah Cross, at the raw patches on her scalp, at the girl he'd called poor and worthless and held down in the dirt, and whatever he'd expected to feel, what he actually felt was the whole weight of it landing on him at once. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice broke on it. "I held you down, I cut your hair, I said those things, there's no reason, there's no excuse. I did it because I could and because everybody let me, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The other 3 said it too, one after another. Some of it was fear, sure, but some of it was real. You could hear the difference. Delilah stood there and listened to it. Then she did something nobody expected, something Rourke didn't expect either. She stepped forward right up to the gate, close enough to touch. And she looked at Cole Tanner and she said, "I forgive you." She paused. Not because you deserve it, you don't, but because I'm not gonna carry you around in me for the rest of my life. You're not worth that much room." Then she stepped back and took her husband's hand, and in the crowd, an old woman started to clap. Then another. Then the whole street. Not for the Tanners, for her. For the girl who'd been held down in the dirt that afternoon and was standing at the gate that night with her head bare and her back straight, being twice the person any of the men who'd hurt her would ever be. The next morning, all four of them walked into the sheriff's station and turned themselves in, just like Rourke said. The video did the rest. There was no fighting it. Cole Tanner took a plea. So did the other three. They didn't get old man sentences, but they got real time, months in the county jail and years of probation after, and every one of them came out with a record that followed them the rest of their lives. In a town that small, everybody knew. Every job interview, every first date, every handshake for the rest of their lives, somebody was thinking about the day they held a girl down in the dirt. Wade Tanner did something too, though it took him a while. He drove out to the Cross Dairy one afternoon alone, and he stood in the yard with his hat in his hands and apologized to Delilah for the son he'd raised. And then he did the thing that actually mattered. He paid off her mortgage, the whole thing. Said it was the least he could do and that he didn't want thanks for it, and he never mentioned it again. I'd like to tell you he did it out of pure goodness. Maybe some of it was. Maybe some of it was a man trying to buy back a piece of his own soul. Either way, the dairy was saved. Delilah didn't grow her hair back right away. She thought about it, and then she decided to keep it short for a good long while. Not out of shame. The opposite. She'd walk into that same feed store with her head barely covered in stubble at first, then a soft dark crop, and she'd look every person in the eye and they'd remember. Not the humiliation. The way she'd stood at that gate. The way she'd said, "You're not worth that much room." Funny thing about a small town. The same long memory that had let Cole Tanner torment her for years now worked the other way. Delilah Cross became something like a legend in Millbrook. The girl they shaved. The girl who forgave. The girl whose husband turned out to be somebody nobody had figured on. The Iron Saints came back through a few times a year after that. Rourke never hid it from her again. She learned that most of what people whispered about the club was wrong, that they ran a toy drive every December and pulled folks out of ditches on the highway in the dead of winter and buried their own with more honor than most churches managed. Hard men, sure, but not the kind of men who'd ever hold a woman down in the dirt. And Rourke stopped disappearing for so long. He set up a shop in Millbrook, right on Main Street, fixed trucks and tractors for half the county, and he was home most nights now. He'd come in tired and smelling of grease, and Delilah would have supper on, and Deacon would be asleep by the stove, that old scarred healer who'd never left her side even on the worst day of her life. Sometimes, on a summer evening, the two of them would sit out on the porch and watch the fields go gold. And Rourke would reach over and rest his hand on the back of her head, on the short, soft hair growing there, gentle as the first day he'd fixed her truck and wouldn't take a dime. "You know what I keep coming back to," she said to him once. "That whole afternoon when it happened, when they had me down there, I kept thinking nobody was coming. I really thought I was all alone in this world." Rourke didn't say anything for a while. He just kept his hand where it was. "You were never alone," he finally said. "You just didn't know yet who was standing behind you." Delilah leaned into him. Down at their feet, Deacon's tail thumped once against the boards. The crickets came up. The valley went quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that isn't hiding anything. And somewhere out past the fields, faint on the evening wind, if you listened close, you could just about hear the low, far-off rumble of engines on the highway. Coming home.